That photo. You know exactly which one. You have seen it. You have stopped your scroll for it. You have maybe even saved it, sent it to a friend, used it as a reference point in a conversation about what someone can achieve when they have the right lighting and the right angle and the right everything aligned at the right moment. The lighting in that photo is extraordinary. The proportions are extraordinary. The skin, luminous, smooth, impossibly even, is extraordinary. And the overall effect is of a person who has arrived, who has crossed some threshold that most people only approach, who has looked in the mirror and finally seen the version of themselves they always intended to be. You look at it and you feel something, that specific aspirational pull that keeps people following accounts for years. And for a long time, genuinely, for years, the audience accepted that image as documented reality, photography as truth, a woman, a camera, a moment captured. And then something happened. A digital forensics expert, someone who does this professionally, who is credentialed in this specific technical field, who has been cited in mainstream publications about image manipulation, sat down with 200 of Darcey's most prominent images and ran the analysis. And the report that came out of that process is 43 pages long. And page 1 already changes things. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Tell All Tapes. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and turn on your notifications because what we do here is go where the conversation needs to go, with the receipts to back it up. Now let's get into it. Before we get into the technical findings, and we will get into every single one of them, we need to talk about why this particular story hits differently than the standard celebrity photo editing conversation. Because the photo editing conversation is everywhere. It is exhausting, honestly. Every week there is a new expose, a new side-by-side, a new comment section full of people pointing at backgrounds and door frames. It has become its own genre of content. And most of the time, the conversation is pretty surface level. Someone edited their waist, someone smoothed their skin, everyone does it, everyone knows everyone does it, and the cycle continues. But Darcey's situation is not that conversation. It is a completely different conversation wearing the same clothes. And the reason it is different comes down to one thing: the specific brand promise that Darcey Silva has made to her audience over the course of her public life. Because Darcey has not positioned herself as a fantasy figure. She has not presented herself as an avatar, a character, a consciously constructed image that exists separately from the real woman behind it. She has done the opposite. She has positioned herself as real, as the truth of a woman navigating life, love, loss, reinvention, the whole brutal, beautiful mess of it. The no-filter caption: "This is my energy." The explicit, on-camera, said directly to the audience contrast she has drawn between her own authenticity and the manufactured personas of others. Those positioning choices are not incidental. They are the foundation of the entire brand. And that foundation is what makes the forensics report not just interesting, but genuinely significant. Here is why. When you do not claim authenticity, the editing conversation is a style choice. It is aesthetic. It is subjective. You can have that argument forever and nobody wins because it is a matter of preference. But when you claim authenticity, when you build your brand on the idea that what the audience sees is what is real, you have changed the rules of the conversation. You have made authenticity a specific promise. And when that promise gets technically examined pixel by pixel, and the examination produces a 43-page document with categorical findings, we are no longer in the realm of preference or interpretation. We are in the realm of documentation. And documentation is a different thing entirely. Now, let us talk about how this forensics analysis actually works, because I think understanding the technical side of this makes the findings land with the weight they deserve. Digital forensics, specifically image forensics, is a field that exists at the intersection of photography, computer science, and legal evidence work. These are not people who look at photos with their eyes and go, something seems off. That is what we do. What forensics experts do is fundamentally different. They work at the data level. They are looking at the actual file, the raw information that makes up the image, and they are running it through analytical tools that detect anomalies that are invisible to the human eye, but visible to the software. Things like pixel-level inconsistencies that indicate post-processing beyond normal camera and lighting adjustments. Cloning artifacts, the telltale signatures left when one area of an image has been copied and stamped over another area. Frequency analysis, which detects unnatural patterns in the image data that emerge when an image has been composited from multiple source files. Error level analysis, which reveals areas of an image that were saved or resaved at different compression rates than the surrounding areas, a signature of after-the-fact editing. These are not vibes. These are not "she looks too perfect." These are technical signatures embedded in the data of the file itself, and those signatures are either there or they are not. The expert who conducted this analysis has professional accountability. Their name is attached to a methodology. Their conclusions can be reviewed by other experts with the same tools. This is not anonymous speculation. This is credentialed analysis with documented methodology. And when that kind of analysis produces findings, specific, categorized, technically documented findings across a 200-image sample, the appropriate response is not dismissal. The appropriate response is engagement with the evidence, which is exactly what has not happened, and that absence is telling. Let me walk you through what the report found, because the categories the expert uses are important, and I want to take them seriously in the way they deserve to be taken seriously. The expert did not produce a single blanket finding. They produced categorical findings of specific types of manipulation identified through specific technical methods. That granularity is actually significant because it tells you something about the nature and extent of what was found. Category 1. Images showing evidence of body morphing beyond what is attributable to normal lens distortion. Now, lens distortion is real. Wide-angle lenses create distortion. Camera angles create distortion. Lighting creates the perception of dimension and proportion. A competent forensics expert accounts for all of that. The body morphing findings in this report are findings that remain after controlling for every natural photographic variable. They are identified through background pixel analysis, looking at the lines and patterns in the background of an image and determining whether they are geometrically consistent with what they would look like in an unaltered photograph, or whether they show the characteristic warping that results from body morphing tools that distort the background as a side effect of altering the foreground subject. 47 images out of 200 showed this signature. 47. Category 2. Images showing evidence of facial structure alteration beyond what is achievable through lighting and angle. This category is identified through facial landmark consistency mapping, essentially, charting the position and proportion of key facial features across multiple images and testing for consistency. Faces change across angles and lighting. That is normal and expected. but there is a range of variation that is consistent with natural photographic difference, and there is variation that exceeds that range in ways that indicate structural alteration. The expert found 31 images in this category. 31 photographs in which the face that appears is not simply the face from a different angle or in different light, but a face that has been technically altered at the structural level. And then there is category 3. This is the one that circulated in the technical community. This is the finding that specialists in digital forensics apparently stopped and looked at twice when the report made its rounds. The expert calls this category composite elements. What that means, and I want to be precise here because the word matters. What that means is images in which portions of the photograph appear to originate from different source photographs, assembled into a single presented image. Composite construction. 11 images. 11 photographs presented to the audience as single, unified moments, a real person, a real place, a real time that the technical analysis found to contain elements assembled from multiple different source files. 11. And I need to dwell on that for a moment because this category is qualitatively different from the others. Body morphing and facial alteration are editing, taking a photograph and altering what is in it. Composite construction is not editing. Composite construction is building. It is the difference between adjusting a document and writing a new one, and labeling it an original. Think about what that finding means when it lands against the specific brand promise we talked about, the no filter caption. This is real energy, the authenticity positioning. An edited photograph can still be, at its core, a real moment, a real person in a real place, captured by a camera, altered afterward. A composite construction is not that. A composite construction is a created image, and 11 of them were presented within a brand built on authentic documentation of real life as real moments. That is not a matter of filtering. That is a matter of construction versus documentation, and those are different things with different implications. Now, here is where the stakes get specifically acute in a way that goes beyond the personal and into the professional and regulatory. We are in 2026. The regulatory environment around digital image disclosure in commercial content has shifted significantly. This is not hypothetical. Multiple jurisdictions have implemented or are in the process of implementing requirements that mandate disclosure of significant digital alteration in content that is commercial in nature. Content associated with brand partnerships. Content that promotes products or services. Content that functions as advertising, even when it is structured as personal documentation. The Federal Trade Commission in the United States has expanded its guidance on this. The UK's Advertising Standards Authority has been active in this space. The EU has moved in this direction as part of broader digital authenticity initiatives. The trend line is clear, and it is not reversing. And Darcey's content is commercial content. It carries brand partnerships. It promotes products of her own line, collaborating brands, and lifestyle partnerships. When she posts an image, that image is doing commercial work. It is functioning in the marketplace. And if the forensics report's findings are accurate and the expert has staked their professional credibility on the methodology, then the question of whether significant digital alteration was disclosed in those commercial images is not a personal question. It is a regulatory question. Compliance questions in commercial content have regulatory answers, answers that exist in writing, answers that agencies are increasingly interested in enforcing. The shift in the regulatory environment means that the distance between a photographic authenticity finding and a professional compliance finding has gotten considerably shorter than it used to be. There is also the audience relationship to consider, and this is the piece that I find most genuinely complicated, because it requires a specific kind of honesty about what the audience was responding to. When someone posts an image, particularly within a brand built on authenticity, and the audience responds with likes, with comments, with "you look amazing," with the comparison to goddesses, with the "teach me your secrets" energy, they are responding to what they believe is a real person in a real moment. They are emotionally investing in a documentary. They are saying, "I see you, this real version of you, and I find it beautiful." That is a specific emotional transaction. It is generous, it is vulnerable, and it is predicated on the belief that the image is what it claims to be. When the image turns out to be something different from what it claimed to be, the emotional transaction retroactively changes. Not for everyone. Some people will say this does not matter to them, and that is a valid position. But for a significant portion of the audience, the discovery produces a very particular feeling. The feeling of having been foolish with your emotional generosity. And people who feel foolish about emotional generosity, about having given something genuine to something that was not genuine in return, do not become neutral. They become the opposite of emotionally generous. The audience that was built on validation becomes, in the moment of discovery, something close to the opposite of validation. The exact thing the images were built to produce: approval, admiration, the sense that the version of herself Darcey wanted to project was being received, becomes the thing the discovery threatens to revoke. The mechanism designed to generate connection generates, through its exposure, disconnection. It is one of the more painful ironies in this entire situation. But I want to do something that this genre of content does not always do. I want to hold the technical findings and the human reality at the same time. Because the forensics report, whatever its 43 pages of technical documentation say, is also a document about a person. A specific person with a specific history and a specific relationship to her own image. And that relationship did not develop in a vacuum. Darcey Silva has spent years publicly, on television, in real time, navigating what it means to look at herself and find the image insufficient. The procedures, and they are real, documented, visible to anyone watching the show across its seasons, represent a literal, physical, irreversible pursuit of a specific visual result. She has gone under the knife, recovered on camera, revealed results, named the specific features she wanted changed, and showed the audience what that change looked like. None of that is secret. All of it speaks to a person who has felt consistently and at significant personal cost that the unmodified version of herself was not enough. Digital manipulation, if the forensics report is accurate, exists in that same emotional territory. It is the same impulse in a different medium. The surgery and the editing are both expressions of the deep, pre-conscious, possibly not fully examined belief that the real image is not sufficient for the audience's gaze, that the unmodified version will not receive the response that the modified version will, that the gap between the self you are and the self the audience will accept has to be closed by technical means, whether those means are a surgeon's tools or a software's. Understanding that does not change the findings. It does not address the composite constructions or the regulatory implications or the broken promise of the authenticity brand. but it does change the register in which the findings should be received. This is not a story about a bad person who deceived an audience for sport. This is a story about the specific kind of pain that makes someone feel they cannot be seen as they are. And that pain is worth naming, even in a conversation that is also about accountability. Now, the accountability piece. Because compassion and accountability are not mutually exclusive, and treating them as if they are does a disservice to both. The fact that image manipulation can be understood, can be traced to real psychological roots, can be met with empathy, does not make the specific findings of the forensics report disappear. The 47 body morphed images are not less body morphed because the motivation behind them was pain rather than malice. The 31 facially altered ones are not less altered. The 11 composites, and I come back to the composites because they are the finding that changes the nature of the conversation from editing to construction. The 11 composites are not less constructed. The technical reality is not altered by the emotional context. Both things are true simultaneously. The motivation is understandable. The findings are what they are. And here is where the double bind of digital forensics becomes genuinely inescapable. Because in most controversies, most image controversies, most authenticity controversies, there is a response available that can at least shift the conversation. You can say the photos were taken out of context. You can say the lighting was misleading. You can say people are misinterpreting what they see. These responses work because the evidence they are responding to is interpretive. When the evidence is a credentialed expert's technical analysis of file-level data, those responses are not available. The data is what it is. The pixel anomalies are present or they are not. The cloning artifacts are detectable or they are not. The frequency signatures of composite construction either appear in the file analysis or they do not. When a credentialed expert with professional accountability says they are present with documented methodology, with specific markers identified and illustrated, with the technical community's peer review, the response cannot be, "That is not what I see." You cannot see pixel-level forensics data with your eyes. Neither can the person being analyzed. The only available counter-argument is a counter-expert, another credentialed analyst running the same tools on the same files and producing different findings. And counter-experts look at the same pixels. They run the same analysis. And the data does not change because a different person looked at it. That is the specific trap that forensics creates. It closes off the exits that are usually available in these conversations, and it leaves the analyzed subject in a position where the only productive response is engagement with the technical findings, specific substantive engagement that either explains the anomalies within the framework of photographic variables the expert may not have fully accounted for, or acknowledges what the analysis found and addresses it directly. Neither of those has happened, and the silence in the space where that response should be is itself a kind of evidence, not in a legal sense, but in the sense that anyone watching this story develop can feel the weight of. We are 3,000 words into this story, and we have not yet touched the specific images the community has been examining independently since the report circulated. We have not talked about what happened when regular audience members, not forensics experts, just people who had been told what to look for, started applying the framework themselves to the publicly available content. We have not talked about what the community found when they started looking at backgrounds, at geometric consistency, what the experts' report taught an entire audience to see that they had not been seeing before. We have not talked about what that means for every image Darcey posts from this point forward. And we have not talked about what the television production context adds to this conversation, because there is a layer to this story that lives specifically in the space between the Instagram presence and the show that made that Instagram presence relevant. That is the second part of this video. Hit subscribe right now if you have not already, because part 2 goes places that part 1 only gestures toward: the community findings, the production context, the specific images the report flagged that the audience has independently been examining. And the question that sits at the center of all of it is the question that the 43-page report does not answer, that no technical analysis can answer, that only Darcey herself can answer. At what point does the pursuit of the image become more consuming than the life the image is supposed to document? Stay with us. The second part is starting now. You know where we left off. We were standing at the edge of a question. The question of what happens after a credentialed expert produces a technical document, the community gets access to its framework, and an entire audience that was previously looking at photographs casually begins looking at them with tools. That is where we pick up. And I want to warn you, this second half goes into territory that the first half only approached, because the story does not end with a report. The report is where it begins. Here is something that happens in the internet age that did not happen before the internet age, and that the subjects of this kind of analysis often do not anticipate. When a technical framework for examining images becomes publicly available, even summarized, even simplified, even stripped of its most complex elements and translated into language that non-experts can apply, it does not stay in the hands of experts. It distributes. It spreads through the community that is already watching and already engaged and already, if we are being honest, already looking for things to look at. The forensics report circulated. People read it. People read summaries of it. People watched breakdowns of its methodology. And then something happened that the expert probably did not specifically intend, and Darcey definitely did not anticipate. Regular people, followers, fans, critics, curious observers with no credentials and no professional accountability, but also no agenda beyond their own curiosity, began applying the framework to the publicly available content themselves. They started looking at backgrounds. And what you see when you start looking at backgrounds with the specific question of geometric consistency in mind is not what you see when you are scrolling casually. A casually scrolled image is processed holistically. The eye goes to the subject, takes in the overall impression, moves on. An image examined for background pixel consistency is a completely different experience. You are looking at lines, at angles, what the lines behind a body should look like if the body has not been digitally altered, and what they look like when they have. Door frames, tile grids, window panes, horizon lines, architectural elements that should be straight, fabric patterns that should repeat consistently, water surfaces that should maintain a consistent plane. These are the tells. These are what the forensics expert was looking at with their tools. And when the community learned to look at them with their eyes, which is a cruder instrument, but still an instrument, they started finding things. A lot of things. In a lot of images that had been publicly available for years without anyone looking at them this way. I am not going to name specific images in this conversation, not because the findings are not documentable. They are right there in the public content. Anyone can look. But because the more important story is not any single image. The more important story is the aggregate, the pattern, the fact that when a community of people who are now actively looking at backgrounds and geometric consistency starts examining a library of 200 publicly available images, they do not find one or two anomalies that might be explained by lens distortion or camera angle or the 1,000 other natural photographic variables that a competent forensics expert already accounts for. They find a pattern that is consistent with the report's categorical findings. Not every image, not universally, but consistently enough across enough of the library that the pattern itself becomes the evidence. You can explain one anomaly as lens distortion. You can explain two as an unusual angle. At some point, the number of individual explanations required to account for the cumulative evidence becomes its own kind of answer. And here is the thing about that community of newly minted image examiners. They are not going away. That is the part of this story that I think has the longest term implications for Darcey's content going forward. Before the report, the audience looked at her images with the casual eye of people who had been given no reason to look more carefully. After the report, that same audience has been handed a framework, a vocabulary, a set of specific things to look for that they did not know to look for before. You cannot unteach that. You cannot take the framework back. Every image Darcey posts from this moment forward will be looked at by an audience that now contains a significant subset of people who are actively examining backgrounds, testing geometric consistency, running their own crude versions of the analysis the expert ran with professional tools. She has not just lost the ability to edit without scrutiny. She has created, out of her own audience, a permanent community of image analysts who are specifically interested in her content. She made the experts. And the experts are now a permanent feature of her audience landscape. Now let us talk about the production context, because there is a layer to this story that gets missed when the conversation stays purely in the Instagram sphere, and it matters. Darcey Silva is not just an Instagram personality. She is a television personality. She exists in a context where cameras roll that she does not control, where lighting is not curated by her team, where the angles are chosen by a production crew with their own priorities, and where the result ends up on screens that millions of people watch. And the television context creates a specific and interesting complication for the forensics findings, because the audience that watches the show sees a version of Darcey that exists outside the controlled environment of her own image creation. The show is not raw, and television production involves its own layers of production value, but it is uncontrolled in the specific way that matters here. It is a camera pointed at a real person in real time, producing images that Darcey has not had the opportunity to process after the fact. And that television version of Darcey has always existed in an interesting tension with the Instagram version. This is not a new observation. The 90 Day Fiancé audience has been making this observation for years. But the forensics report gives that long-running observation a technical framework it did not previously have. The gap between the Instagram Darcey and the television Darcey is not just a matter of lighting or preparation or the difference between a candid and a curated shot. If the forensics report's findings are accurate, some portion of that gap is the gap between a digitally constructed image and a photographically captured one, between a built result and a documented one. And seeing those two versions side by side, the constructed one and the captured one, now carries a different weight for an audience that has been handed the vocabulary to describe the difference. This is also where the show itself becomes relevant in a way that extends beyond Darcey's personal brand. Because Darcey and Stacey is a show about transformation, about reinvention, about the pursuit of a specific version of yourself that feels more right than the version you started with. That is the show's stated emotional territory. And within that territory, the procedures have always been presented as part of the story, not hidden, not apologized for, but documented and discussed and framed within the show's broader narrative about becoming. The audience has watched the journey of physical transformation across multiple seasons. They have been invited into that journey as participants, as witnesses, as people who are rooting for the arrival at the destination. And that invitation is the thing that makes the forensics findings specifically resonant in the context of the show. Because if the journey toward the image, the surgery, the recovery, the reveal is the story the show is telling, then the finding that the arrived at image was subsequently further constructed changes the nature of the destination. It moves the finish line. The transformation the audience was invited to witness and celebrate was not the end of the transformation. It was a waypoint in a continuing process of construction that extended beyond the operating room and into the digital editing suite. And the audience was not told that. They were given the arrival. They were not told the arrival had a second chapter they were not seeing. That is the specific breach of the show's implicit contract with its audience, not the editing itself, but the selective disclosure of where the transformation ended and where the construction began. Let me address the response that is always available in this conversation and always gets deployed, because it will be deployed here and it deserves a direct engagement. The response is, everyone does this. And look, I said in the first part of this video that this response is technically true. Almost everyone who has posted a photograph has made some adjustment to it. Brightness, contrast, a filter, skin smoothing, teeth whitening. These are so normalized that they barely register as decisions anymore. They are just the baseline of how photographs exist in the digital age. And pointing that out generates genuine audience agreement because it is true and it resonates with everyone's actual lived experience of existing online. I am not dismissing that response. I am saying it is not a response to the specific findings of this report. The response, everyone does this, addresses the 30% of people who have boosted a photo's brightness before posting. It does not address 47 images with documented background pixel anomalies indicating body morphing beyond lens distortion variables. It addresses the universal human instinct to present well in photographs. It does not address 31 images in which facial structure alteration was identified through landmark consistency mapping. And most specifically, most importantly, it does not address 11 composite constructions. Everyone does this is a response to editing. It is not a response to building. And 11 photographs identified as composite constructions are not edited photographs. They are built ones. You cannot everyone does this your way out of a composite. You can everyone does this brightness and contrast. You cannot everyone does this an image constructed from multiple source files and presented as a single documentary moment. Those are categorically different things, and collapsing the difference between them is not an argument. It is a deflection. And the audience that has read the report knows the difference now. Here is the emotional reality at the center of this entire story, and I want to sit with it for a moment before we get to the conclusion. Because there is something genuinely heartbreaking in the logic of what the forensics report documents. Not heartbreaking as a defense, not heartbreaking as a reason to look away from the findings, but heartbreaking as a truth about what it costs to pursue an image that always seems to be one more adjustment away. Darcey Silva has spent enormous resources, financial resources, physical resources, the resource of recovery time, the resource of pain, modifying her actual physical self. Real procedures, real results, results that exist in three-dimensional space and show up on camera and can be seen by anyone watching the show. She did that because the unmodified version of herself did not feel like enough, because there was a gap between the self she was and the self she wanted the audience to see. And she closed that gap with surgery. And then after the surgery, after the recovery, after the reveal, after the empowerment narrative that the show built around the transformation, the photography shows evidence of further modification. The procedures were done so the photographs would look a certain way, and then the photographs were altered to look even more a certain way than the procedures produced. It is a specific kind of recursive trap. Each modification is supposed to be the last one. Each version of the image is supposed to be the final one, the real one, the one that finally matches the internal image that has been the target all along. And then it is not enough, and the next modification begins. Surgery, followed by editing, followed by composite construction. Each one a response to the insufficiency of the previous result, each one moving further from the original while promising to be the definitive arrival. At some point, and this is the question I left you with at the end of part 1, the question I said no technical analysis can answer, at some point, the pursuit of the image becomes more consuming than the life the image is supposed to document. The photograph was supposed to capture life. Life began to exist in service of the photograph. The procedures were done for the image. The image was then altered. And somewhere in that sequence, the thing that was supposed to be documented was the real life of a real woman with real relationships and real experiences and real pain got buried under successive layers of construction. That is not a forensics finding. That is a human one. And it is worth grieving, even in the middle of a conversation about accountability and regulatory compliance and the specific technical signatures of composite image construction. But the accountability piece does not disappear because the human piece is real. Both things are true. The findings exist. They are documented. They are in 43 pages produced by a credentialed expert who has staked their professional reputation on the methodology. And they are not going to stop existing because the context in which they were produced is complicated and sympathetic and rooted in a kind of pain that is genuinely understandable. The numbers are the numbers. The categories are the categories. And the community that now has the framework to examine future images is the community that will be looking at everything Darcey posts from this point forward with eyes that did not exist before this report circulated. That is the conclusion of this story. Not a dramatic ending, not a verdict. Just a set of facts that have settled into the landscape and changed it permanently. The report exists. The findings exist. The community of newly aware image examiners exists. The regulatory environment that makes commercial image disclosure increasingly consequential exists. The gap between the Instagram version and the television version, which has always existed and which the audience has always intuited, now has a technical vocabulary attached to it that it did not have before. All of that exists now. None of it is going back into the box. And Darcey Silva, a woman who has spent years publicly in front of cameras she could not control, navigating the specific pain of feeling like she is not enough as she is, has to now exist in a public space where the images she produces with the tools available to her will be examined more carefully than they have ever been examined before, by people she made into examiners. In a media environment where the tools for that examination are increasingly accessible to anyone who wants to use them. That is the world the report created, and it is the world she posts into now. Now. Before I let you go, because we do this properly here at the Tell All Tapes, and properly means we do not just drop 43 pages of forensics findings on you and walk away. We came back. We follow the story. We track the response or the silence where the response should be. We watch what happens to the posting patterns after a report like this circulates, and what changes and what does not change, and what those changes and non-changes tell us about the larger story. We are not done with this one, not even close. The forensics report is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it. And that conversation is going to develop in real time, in public, in the comment sections and the community forums, and the independent analyses that are going to keep coming as more people pick up the framework and apply it to the existing library of content. We are going to be here for all of it. Every development, every response, every independent finding from the community, every piece of the regulatory picture as it continues to develop, every moment where the television version and the Instagram version create a contrast that now carries a different weight than it carried before. We are going to cover it with the same rigor and the same honesty and the same refusal to reduce a complicated human story to a simple takedown that we brought to this first installment. Because that is what this channel is. That is what the Tell All Tapes does. We go where the conversation needs to go. We bring the receipts. We hold the complexity without losing the accountability. And we do it for an audience that we trust to be able to hold all of it at once. The findings and the empathy and the implications and the human reality without needing it simplified into something easier than it actually is. You are that audience. You have proven it by making it to the end of a video that did not take any shortcuts. And if this is the kind of content you want to keep seeing, the kind that takes the story seriously, that does the work, that treats you like an adult who can handle nuance, then there is one thing I need from you right now. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that button, turn on notifications so that when we drop the follow-up to this story, and we will drop it because this story is not done, you are the first person to know about it. Leave a comment below telling me what you think about the forensics findings. Tell me whether you think the composite category changes the conversation for you. Tell me where you land on the accountability versus empathy question. Tell me what you want us to dig into next. This channel grows because of that engagement, and that engagement shapes what we cover next. Like this video if it gave you something to think about. Share it with someone who has been following this story and has not seen this angle of it yet. And stay close because the follow-up is coming, the story is developing, and the Tell All Tapes will be right here when it does. Look closely at everything.